I did what I think many people do and I set up a ton of meetings back to back. But the thing I didn't account for was all the spontaneous meetings that are just so fun and fruitful and productive. And it just reminds me how small of a space HR tech is.
I think specifically this year, given everything in the zeitgeist, I think what I'm most curious about is how folks are thinking about AI applications in a way to not create efficiencies or reduce headcount, but instead to enable a better employee experience.
It is intense. It is a phenomenal event to understand the market trends and actually I use the word with my team and my colleagues that it also actually validates, are you on the right track as an HR leader? Hi there. I'm Denise Chaffin, and I am your podcast host for Talking TA. Hey, welcome to a special episode of Talking TA from Transform 2025, one of the most vibrant, forward-thinking gatherings in the world of HR and talent acquisition. Meeting at the intersection of innovation, leadership, and culture, this event has brought together some trailblazers, change makers, and some of the brightest minds across our industry. And we were there in the room, capturing that energy, the conversations, and the insights as they happened. First of all, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to the organizers of Transform for curating such an intentional and inspiring experience. And to the many leaders and guests, of course, who shared their wisdom, candor, and time with us. You made this episode not just possible, but super powerful. In this conversation-rich episode, we're going to explore three of the most pivotal topics shaping the now and future of work. Let's begin with the rise of agentic AI. As AI evolves from a tool to a collaborator, what does it mean for HR and talent acquisition? You're going to hear some sharp takes on balancing autonomy and ethics and the real role of the human in the loop and how to use AI, not just to optimize, but to elevate the human experience. Next, we turn to the candidate journey. It's no secret the hiring experience is long overdue for an upgrade. What does it look like to build a truly human-centric process in a high-volume, tech-driven world? From transparency to empathy, from ghosting to growth, our guests share actionable ideas for how we can do better together. And finally, we're going to unpack the ever-evolving return to office conversation. Yep, beyond buzzwords and mandates, this episode offers fresh perspectives on flexibility, culture, and the deeper why behind how we design where and how work gets done. Whether you're an HR or TA leader, a business executive, a TA practitioner, a startup founder, or simply someone passionate about people and progress, this conversation will leave you with ideas to reflect on and questions worth asking. So stay with us. You're about to hear unfiltered insights from some of the most influential voices in the industry. And if you're new here, welcome. Be sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future episodes where we bring you more conversations that push boundaries, challenge assumptions, and shed some great light on our path forward. Now, let's get into it.
I go to a lot of conferences, and I think Transform is one of the best conferences out there. It's produced extremely well. The conversations are great. Given it's a lot of CHROs, they care about culture, they lean in, they do want to network.
What we're seeing here at Transform is HR has a huge implication. Sure. And or a huge role to play in. Sure. Sure.
This show is very unique, right? I mean, there's definitely not another one like it. And I appreciate kind of the diversity of the crowd, right? I mean, there's a lot of people in HR or in around HR, but I don't think like this show doesn't seem to have like a defined job title, right? So we're out here networking, meeting some fantastic people, talking to people like you, and it's a high caliber show all around. So the biggest takeaway is just forming those relationships and keeping the conversation going.
I did what I think many people do and I set up a ton of meetings back to back. But the thing I didn't account for was all the spontaneous meetings that are just so fun and fruitful and productive. And it just reminds me how small of a space HR tech is. Just like running into people that I've worked with that I've only met over Zoom, some even Greenhouse alumni. That's always really a good time. And I really feel like that in-person connection is just like this burst of energy. It's very invigorating to feel, especially if you work remote for most of the time.
This is our second year coming to Transform. First year was amazing. And one of the best takeaways was simply the interactions with all the folks and great minds coming together. And it's just a wonderful event.
So tell me what brings you to Transforming. What key takeaway do you want from this conference, or great lesson have you learned so far?
Yeah, Transform has a reputation for being one of the best communities, one of the strongest, most purpose-driven organizations in all of HR in particular. So that's why we definitely wanted to be here. Our mission is better work, better world. If we can send people home after having a great work experience, they're going to take that to their families, to their communities, and beyond. But we know the work experience can be really challenging. And right now it's going through a lot of transformation and change. So when we come to Transform, it's to really find like-minded people who are really at the forefront of what comes next. And we want to make sure that we can understand them and support them with the different types of solutions that we provide.
I find that this is a great place to understand the themes that are happening in the HR space. I think both attending workshops like this and also listening to the presenters, you can start to distill what themes are and maybe what's the future is coming for either HR tech or HR. So, and then the general networking is really helpful to understand what people do and really who they are. You can, there's so many people, can be a little bit overwhelming, but I think in general, you have a reason to connect and understand what people do. And it's very, 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 very healthy to kind of step out of work and do this every once in a while.
I think specifically this year, given everything in the zeitgeist, I think what I'm most curious about is how folks are thinking about AI applications in a way to not create efficiencies or reduce headcount, but instead to enable a better employee experience. And that's something we've been thinking quite a lot about at Uplex. So I'm very curious to hear other ideas and other ways that folks are going about intertwining these tools to really enrich the day-to-day experience that we have at work.
Well, like you, Denise, this is my second time at Transform. Okay. I feel very experienced now in that second year. It is intense. It is a phenomenal event to understand the market trends. And actually, I use the word with my team and my colleagues that it also actually validates, are you on the right track as an HR leader? Agentic AI, not just AI, Agentic AI is everywhere in the conference. And we're tasked to think about how does that impact skills in the business and what we're doing to lead those HR functions. And HR is very, very close to the AI evolution. I would also say that there is another trend around cultural transformation and high performance coming off. And I know we don't talk much about COVID anymore, but there is a shift in terms of making sure that you're still taking care of employees, they feel safe, they are performing in their environments and so forth. And there's a real focus to ensure that we actually deliver on business results. So I do see that as another shift coming out of Transform.
I'm hearing a lot more openness to the partnership between AI and people in the way that that HR and talent acquisition processes go. So we've been working in this space for a little while, and even if you go back a couple of years, there was a sort of big feeling that AI was a little bit ick in the whole hiring process, and there were compliance concerns, and there were all sorts of really fair questions, but essentially resistance to the idea. And I really feel like that tone has changed this year. People are very interested and excited about how AI and people together can actually create better experiences for candidates and more human connection and more. So that's been actually nice to see. I mean, I knew it would happen at some point, but it's nice to see it happening quickly.
The big takeaway is that everyone is clamoring to know, does some company have this whole generative AI thing figured out and we don't? And I think the takeaway is that I don't think anyone does. And there are maybe a few people that are a bit more advanced than others. But for most of us, we're somewhere in the We're starting to dabble. We're seeing a little bit of marginal productivity gains here and there, and certainly using it, but that right now it is not changing our productivity, our ability to need as many people as we do our work. Like everything that we have been doing in the past, we've been augmented slightly. And yet we also see that on the horizon, things are going to change, but they haven't changed yet. And I think you get often at these events a sense of satisfaction that I'm okay, you're okay, right?
There's always going to be a human element to it. Like, I don't think everybody's afraid that the machines are going to take over. I think we don't see it that way. We think that there's going to be a line that companies and leaders have to draw between where their humans are and their human interaction is going to be most prevalent and most valuable, and then where the technology is going to be most prevalent and most valuable.
We're seeing some advanced systems that can make decisions and take actions on their own, agentic AI. So let's talk about that for a minute. How do you see HR and talent acquisition teams adopting these technologies to further impact their own workspace?
So the adoption of AI has been inexorable, but slow. And it's slow not because the technology is there, but because people need to absorb and understand it and its impact. And nobody is ready, and I don't believe there should be, to hand over important decisions to an independent AI who's going to make those decisions on your behalf. So it's a process of understanding, first of all, what is the power of AI in general in a workplace? And then second, which of those AI processes am I comfortable allowing the system to make independently? And which decisions do I want to reserve as a human? And in general, I believe, and I think we try to argue today, that the human piece is a critical part of the cycle. And therefore, these systems need to, yes, move down their own path of looking for leverage or efficiency, but also need to throw out when something pops up that is not an obvious decision, get that human back into the loop and make sure that it's human-based AI leveraged decision-making as opposed to completely independent AI doing the work and making the judgments.
Agentic AI is going to take time for it to be fully autonomous. So you're gonna have what's called human in the loop in the process, but you'll have workflows with agentic AI. So it's gonna help HR professionals maybe go through different resumes quicker, really find the nuggets of information that you really want to find inside of a resume. Um, really manage the knowledge of an enterprise to see what's happening, how is the culture feeling, how are people feeling, are they happy, are they motivated, are they not motivated? But through that process, you're going to have to leverage AI, but I think you're still going to have humans in that loop where they can actually say, okay, I think this AI is hallucinating or is giving me the wrong information.
The idea of AI has always been that true AI can make decisions on its own. It evolves and it learns and then is able to apply that information to new decisions and evolve how it formulates those decisions. So it's interesting to see that now finally start to have the first cracks at coming about. I think from our perspective, what's that's going to mean? It's going to enable certainly agents to take on more tasks and more task execution as opposed to just giving information, which has largely been the use cases for it now, or producing content, things like that, or data analysis. Now it's going to be able to do those things, but actually act on it from what it's learning, which will be really interesting.
A couple things. It's a great question. I think it's on the minds of a lot of people here, is that artificial intelligence, I think we have to kind of be humble in admitting that we don't actually know what's going to happen, and like starting there. But I think what we try to think about it as is we have the ability and the autonomy to be proactive about how we integrate technology and people, right? I think right now there's this really kind of fearful divide between those two. It's like people are skeptical, companies are curious as to what the benefits of these tools will be.
And cautious.
Right. And what I think we're saying is, like, we know there will be a future where these two things exist. People, talent acquisition, there will be a future that both of these exist. How do you be proactive in determining what you want that future to look like versus being reactive and kind of watching and just adopting what comes through?
Well, first of all, I want to say I'm not a Luddite. I'm an early adopter. I love technology. I worry that agentic technology is going to further dehumanize the process and further make it difficult for companies to find good candidates.
I think there's this interesting paradox in this space where we need to sort of hold two things simultaneously true in our heads, which are fundamentally agentic AI. AI is going to transform our society in ways that we probably can't really fathom and that are going to be hugely disruptive.
Candidates are going to jump in to use AI to write better resumes, to trick out the LinkedIn profiles, whatever they're going to do. It's going to be hard for a recruiter or a hiring manager to understand what was the candidate writing and what was the AI writing. So if I'm looking for a candidate with critical skills, professional experience, it may be difficult for me to understand what the value is based on what the candidate is presenting. So I'm going to use AI detection software to figure out what is real and what is AI. On the other hand, agents are going to be overwhelmed by or are going to be used by candidates to mass submit.
Oh, sure. They're already doing it.
Right.
Yeah.
So if the proverbial 250 applicants per position starts to jump to 2,500, 25,000 applications per position, companies are going to be overwhelmed. They're going to have to use agentic technology to sift through the agent submitted applications. It's a explosion of confusion, right? It gets back to, I think, you got to spend a little bit more money to get real people to talk to real people,
Right.
to be able to build a workforce that's going to last longer, where you're not changing it out.
So there's going to be this disruption. I think that is a pretty clear thing if you watch this space closely enough. And at the same time, when it comes to something like agentic AI, I don't feel like we need to be moving in some sort of cat-like readiness position where I've got to be the first ones to get there because the first person to get the cheese is going to be the winner in this, right?
Right.
These products are going to be integrated into the large platforms. There are going to be winners in this space, just like there's Gmail, and maybe there's a few people who kept their old Hotmail account or whatever. But at some point, everybody figures out that there's a platform to use for these things. And of course, there are companies that are starting to market these things and starting to turn on with a bit of agency. But all of our platforms have these firewalls and safeguards and context. And if I think about the sort of ecosystem of all the technology stack I use, I can't even navigate my tech stack myself because of the passwords and the firewalls and what my work restricts from my personal and so on and so forth. And so I don't think there's some big system out there that we need to be watching for because we've got to get it the minute it's on the market, right?
Good example of the thing that Cassidy and Tigran were talking about, because if you use AI to take care of the tasks that are repetitive, that are manual, that can like bog people down, then the question is, well, then if so much of our jobs were formerly that, how are we pivoting to continue to drive value for the company or whatever we're working for? And so for TA, I think there's like a really interesting conversation happening. I talked about this a little bit on my panel earlier, where I think there's a bunch of different perspectives around like, oh, agentic AI will get so good that we won't need recruiters anymore, or we won't need like these people in these administrative people functions. But I actually beg to differ on that one, because I think when you're talking about like business leaders trying to recruit people, the role of the TA person is to do things that the hiring manager probably won't prioritize like in their day-to-day, which is like being like candidate experience, for example, closing the loop with candidates. Hiring managers always want to hire someone yesterday, or like the teacher always wants support from their business partner on all these things like as soon as possible. But the reality is, like, I think HR plays a really important role in being like the arbiter of like these two different demographics, if you will, whether it's candidate and employees and managers, and provides like an objective lens as a partner in terms of like how you go about your processes, what you need to do from an HR perspective in order to hire people or maybe performance manage someone, etc. So if I think the people who do like recruiting great, the people who do business partnering great, I think they're going to thrive because they're going to lean more into the ability to be strategic because they're no longer bogged down with those day-to-day things. I do think we'll see probably some painful transformation too, where the folks that really relied on doing the repetitive things, like now have to develop a new set of skills. Right.
Yeah, I think over the last 2 years with generative AI in particular, we started to really ask these questions about, wow, those are activities that used to be reserved just for humans. And so it's really challenged our thinking around what do we want these AI tools to do and to be. And I think the real risk that they provide is that we might focus too much on the productivity gains, the performance outcomes, the technical aspects of business, and maybe let some of the technology do things that, for example, managers need to be doing. Right? That's an inevitable consequence that can happen. But I do think there's also this possibility that AI, because it will free up some time, has this very optimistic opportunity for us to rehumanize our workplaces, because now we won't have as much time spent doing administrative things that the machines and the computers can do very easily. We'll have more time to coach and mentor, to build strong relationships, to get closer to the customers, all these things that only humans can do. So I'm very optimistic when looking forward. And I think HR will lead, whether we look at these AI tools as productivity boosters in a more technical fashion only, in which case it will only alienate people more and more, or whether we actually embrace their ability to bring us closer together and to foster stronger relationships with one another, which is actually the competitive differentiation we need when it comes to collaboration, innovation, all the things that create value in our businesses.
Well, so one of the ways I think about agentic AI is a bit like people. There are generalists, they're good at most things, and then there are specialists, people that are just excellent at one particular thing. So the LLMs that came out, ChatGPT and those sorts of things, those are great generalist models. Okay. So HR can very quickly go and you can say into ChatGPT, write a job description for us, or create a conversation map for a coaching conversation, or any of these various things, and you'll come back with a response. Where agents get really interesting is that they can be trained in a much more specific way. So instead of sort of answering questions just generally based on the common knowledge of the LLMs, you can actually say, well, we really believe in this particular coaching methodology. And by the way, here's also some very unique data that a general LLM won't have about that sort of thing. And so these agents can be much more specialized and therefore more effective. So for example, we have agents that help write great interview guides and content. And we've been able to train them in particular ways that make them significantly better than the kinds of things that you would get if you're using a generalist LLM. So I think one thing to think about it is like agents are more specialized. They have access to unique data. You can control them a little bit more in terms of how you want them to be answering questions and the methods that they use. So that's going to be exciting, I think, for TA to see some of those processes.
I think that's one of the things that's making these conferences so popular. Someone last year referred to the conferences as the new water coolers. Right. Well, let's collectively all group together at these conferences so we can see vendors, customers, each other, all in one place.
That's right. Yeah.
So I think that conferences are back.
I'm a technology executive by background. I didn't expect myself to be at an HR conference, but throughout my career, early on, I had my startup. Culture would be implicit based on myself, the founder, things like this. But then I learned to scale that. Culture needs to take a fundamental bedrock principle of what you do when you start organizing and leading large teams. So I think there's a lot to learn here about that.
Tell me what your impression is, what we need to do to improve the candidate experience, not just for candidates that we hire, but for all candidates.
Yes. I think one of the first things is we've got to recognize this is a fundamentally human situation that we're in. We're dealing with real people. So a lot of times when we only see a resume, for example, we're only looking at records in an applicant tracking system, it sort of dehumanizes the process a little bit. We have to fight that urge to look at this as a numbers game, if you will. So one thing we can do to rehumanize that process a bit is to provide a level of awareness, not just for ourselves about the candidate, but even for the candidate about themselves. So as an example, when we recommend using the predictive index, we say, let's use it early in the interview process because we want to make sure that we understand who it is that we're talking to. Sure. Well, a lot of our clients will say, let's go ahead and share the discovery of what we find about the person with the candidate. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is very helpful to me. And I can use this whether I choose to come work for you or if we decide it's a mutual fit or whether I go somewhere else. Okay. So you're getting value from even just exchanging as being part of that selection process, if you will. But then when you get on to have a Zoom screen or a phone screen, or you have an on-site interview, now you know a little bit about the person. So now you can humanize that part of the process and make it much more familiar, comfortable, relational, all those things that you're going to want that candidate to experience if they're going to make the decision to come work with you.
Right.
So I'd say early and
They
often,
don't.
yeah, they don't. Then they might say, you know what, I wasn't the right fit, but I know somebody who might be. And all of a sudden you're like, wow, this is great. So when you treat people like people, I think powered by technology, yes. I always like to say we're powered by technology, but we're empowered by people. See, powered by technology, but
That is
powered by
such a great line. I really like that.
I think it's really the mindset that we need if we're going to be
Yes.
successful in a holistic sense, not just for our business, but for our people, for our teams, and for society. Really, it really extends that far.
Yeah, I think initially AI's made it a lot worse because with the ATS systems, trying to get yourself through that, it becomes a game of how good can I use AI to get past your AI and things like that. And it's not creating that engagement that really makes somebody feel valued in the process. And you don't, all you get is a rejection letter or something like that, and you don't know why. So I think it's using that AI to give constructive feedback as to why you may not have chosen a candidate, to give them feedback so they can improve and get through that and know that there's something on the other end actually giving some feedback rather than me just throwing out 100 resumes and never hearing a word, or getting a rejection letter 2 months later that doesn't tell me anything, right? To create a better experience, right?
And that is the key right there.
Yeah.
Is to create the rejection letters that are going to give some details
Exactly.
and not just we've moved on.
Yeah. And I've been a startup founder, and the VCs that I appreciated the most were the ones that said no, but told me why, rather than the ones that just give you a grin and you're never going to hear from them again, but you get no feedback. So it's no different from a candidate perspective, wanting that feedback at least. And it makes you feel heard, and then you get better, and maybe you do better the next time as well. And AI can help with that, right? So AI right now, I think, has been misused in the recruitment process because it's been used more as a cost cutting, more of dealing with the numbers, the number of candidates you got and things like that, and less about the candidate experience of what they're doing. And with AI, you can still automate that and do it cost effectively, but you have to proactively put those feedback loops in there.
One simple thing that we did a couple of years ago is that in every job description we have, there's a standard blurb that explains our process, which tells you how it's going to work, how the fact that we have panels, that we have bias blockers on all of our interviews and what that means for them, and the amount of transparency they're going to get throughout the process, how many interviewers they should expect, how long it might take them to get through our process. And so kind of letting people know in advance of this is what the system is, these are some of the unusual things about us, that helps candidate experience. And then the second piece of that is we have been very deliberate about following the research that's a good decade old now, which says it is not meaningful how many interviewers you have once you get to approximately 3 interviewers. The marginal benefit, this is some work that Laszlo Bock at Google had done back in his book, Work Rules, which is you get 1% marginal benefit for each additional interviewer after that 3. So we make sure that we follow that insight, and we only have as many people as we need on the interview panel. So that means that you're not going to go through and say, well, great, I'm passing you on to the next level and the next level and the next level. Sometimes it's an endless process. Our process can be a lot faster and leaner because of that. People are going to take different roles. So we're going to have these archetypes that we give to everybody so that you're not going to sit there and say, oh, I got that same question about my resume again. Wait, did I tell you that or did I tell the other person that? People are going to take a different flavor so that ultimately when we get to the roundtable process where we have these kind of bias blocker systems in there, people are going to have different takes. And so somebody's perspective can be combined with somebody else's and say, well, I asked these questions and you asked these questions to try to get the fullest picture. So we can be faster, we can make the process feel more intentional rather than we all just opened up your resume, right, 2 minutes before the interview, scanned quickly to see where you went to school and what your last job and your title was, and asked the same series of questions over and over again. We're trying to curate that experience to make it as fast, as sort of interesting and transparent for the candidate, and all that just makes their process that much easier. And then we're very explicit in our job descriptions, which is kind of our secret sauce, which is we tell you exactly what we're looking for, and we even tell you what we're not looking for. And so we will have these blurbs in there about, hey, if you are super process oriented and you like to have a handbook and a rule book that explains everything, how it's laid out, this isn't the place because we're a lot more flexible and lean and just innovative than that. And we haven't figured everything out. There's no one way to do everything. And if you like that kind of place, you might want to choose a larger, more bureaucratized company. But if you like to build those things and maybe chart your own course and have some nimbleness, that's for you, then come and think about us. And so that way we realized that it wasn't a volume game where we wanted 1 million people applying for our jobs because our TA team is only so large. We wanted that funnel to be narrowed sooner so that by the time you actually have applied for the job, you may have self-selected and hopefully said to yourself somewhere along the way, hey, this premier protein team, these are interesting people. They have told us kind of what their flavor is. I can see the culture starting to come through in their words. And so they're going to apply, and we already have sort of selected in a little bit of like, okay, you might think our quirky kind of way of doing things is for you. Let's have a conversation.
There are more candidates than TA
Right.
can handle.
Right.
So what do? You know you're going to have 900 candidates who are not going to fit.
Right.
So what do you do for those 900 here? So
Get back to people.
Yeah.
The number one problem that my clients come to me with, the number one frustration is ghosting.
Oh, sure.
And it just boggles my mind that in a sea of technology, you can't figure out some automated workflow that gets back to a candidate. Even if that message is to say, sorry, we're moving on. But to have this complete dropping of communications, it's just unacceptable.
My favorite response that I have seen, and I think it's ATS triggered, right? When candidates respond to or submit their resume to a position, is we have had, hey, thank you for submitting your resume. We've had a number of candidates.
Yep.
We will go through your resume. We will review it. And we will contact you if we want to take the next step and set up an interview. Basically, they're acknowledging receiving that resume, but also disclaiming, if you would, the fact that they've received so many resumes.
I think that's shoddy.
Is
I'll
it?
tell you, because if there's an automated system that's able to send that message, there's an automated system that's able to say, we'll get back to you in 3 days with an update.
Okay.
And
Sure.
3
Add
days,
that on.
and in 3 days you get that update, and the update says, we're still reviewing your application. We have received, and there's no reason why they can't put
A number.
which says we've received either 25% more, 50% more, 75,000 applications, whatever that might be for this position.
the problem is, I guess the problem is what do you do with 900 candidates you know are not going to get the job? What do you do with those people? And if it's just an email, you're not qualified. And I'm talking to people who've been laid off for months who just feel broken down. They're like this. And I tell them, when people come to me for advice on what should I do, I was like, interviewing and applying for jobs is a soul-sucking experience. And it's not you, it's them.
Yeah.
It's not you, candidate, it's the companies.
Right.
So you have to be able to, you can only look for a job an hour a day.
Right.
If you're beating yourself up that you're not constantly looking for a job all day, there's not enough jobs for you to look. It's 1 hour a day.
Right.
So the things you can do is build your brand, get connected to headhunters so you have someone else
Right.
looking for you.
Yeah.
You know, apply when you can, but no, it's a shot in the dark. You can only look an hour a day, let someone else look another hour a day for you.
Right.
And even if you're at a low level, there are people think you have to be an executive to have a headhunter. There are headhunters that go all levels, right?
Exactly.
And the next part is physical and emotional health. So, all right, you're off for work. Do not feel guilty that you're taking a walk or going to the gym or doing yoga, right? And don't beat yourself up. It's not your fault that you're not landing these jobs.
Right.
There's too many applicants for these jobs. And it's an emotional thing to go through, and you have to keep yourself healthy.
What is the experience those candidates want to have? And you highlighted something. We just want to be seen. We want to be heard. Okay, well, what does that look like? Maybe that's as simple as an email that comes back to that's worded very empathetically of like, hey, like, we know that applying for a job is really difficult right now. We know that you're getting ghosted. Like, we don't love that either. And we have thousands of applicants we need to review. So just bear with us and we'll get back to you when we have a decision. A note like that really can alleviate a lot of the the emotional reaction to someone who's in that pipeline and maybe isn't hearing back. And they say, oh, well, that one company wrote me this really nice note that changed the way I look at and feel about that, So I think the first thing is asking what those candidates want from an experience and designing around that. And then I think, I'm just saying like, hey, like, and that's a really simple thing to do. You could build that note into your applicant tracking system to say like, hey, just be patient with us. And that provides opens up a conversation of empathy to the candidate.
We've come out of a couple of years of attract. Yes, we've had some downswings. There's been a number of contractions in the market that allow companies like 1Password to have access to a broad swath of talent. But what we're starting to see is we need to be very, very transparent and direct about what it means to be at 1Password. What do we expect? What is the kind of the equal onus? What is the candidate going to get? And what is the company going to get in return? And we're seeing very much that shift in the marketplace as a whole. And so on the candidate experience, we want you to have a realistic job experience. So when you come in day one, you're not surprised. Right. You're not surprised about our culture, our values, what we expect, how we operate, what our norms are, and so forth. And on the same side is those individuals who perhaps are not successful in joining. It's also very important that we provide them feedback and be this whole concept of ghosting and so forth. Like everyone needs to have the candidate experience, be it if you're coming in or you're not successful, because employer branding is both external and internal. So it's a whole loop.
What I would love is for everyone that came, not only learn from each other and made some great connections themselves in this interactive session, but also maybe started to think differently about these moments, that magic of in-person that we're trying to harness and bring back by asking folks to come back to the office. Those moments can happen anywhere. They can happen in any building, not your specific building, right? That you can actually engineer and create those moments very intentionally.
Yes.
Through designing a program within the organization. If we start to think differently about that, I think that's going to really reshape some of the policy decisions that we're seeing around workforce planning and where folks work. And that will ultimately, our goal is to allow for this middle ground of flexibility and in person that to the best of its ability can satisfy those opposing forces.
The return to office conversation, because it's coming up a lot still. What is your take on the conversation around RTO versus hybrid and remote work?
Yeah. It's hard to understand the why behind a lot of companies, but it ultimately goes back to that. Like, why do certain leaders feel they need to bring people together? And it could be real estate related reasons. It could be productivity related reasons. It could be onboarding related reasons, which I think are all reasons valid to discuss. So it's not a one size fits all.
I think it's a department by department, team by team question.
Okay.
I wonder whether the press has distorted the reality. Look how what's really going on. And we have these high profile CEOs making declarations about return to work. And I think it makes good clickbait. But I'm not sure, and I would hope that smart leaders and managers are taking this on a person by person, team by team, project by project basis, and recognizing that, look, the genie's out of the bottle. You can do work at home, guys. Yeah, you can do good work at home. You can be really productive at home. And there's studies on both sides of this. I think that they're probably biased in favor of what the orientation is of the researcher or the person taking the position. But I think you can't ignore the fact that there are tasks where if you've got a project deadline by Friday and the office is really busy and you're getting interrupted every 5 minutes and you're trying to think about this report that you're doing, you should go home and write that report at home. Mm-hmm. And a smart manager is going to say, get out of here, right? Mm-hmm. So I think we have to be a little bit more adaptable. I think we have to be a little bit more circumspect. We have to focus again on teams and individuals and what's the context. There may be, look, I come out of Hollywood. I come out of a creative industry. making movies and TV shows is an iterative, creative process. There are times where you want everyone in the room together, and there are times when you want everyone to go away and do their own thing. And then there are times where 2 people, 3 people should work together. They should not work in the office. They should go find another place. Maybe they should go to someone's house and do it. There are so many ways of doing this. I think we're being much too formal about all this. It's either everyone goes home or everyone goes to work, and it's like, it got to show up at. There was a joke. There was a very hard taskmaster executive in Hollywood when I was coming up, who really worked very hard, and he really demanded a lot from his team. And the joke was about him that there was a sign in the parking lot that said, "If you're not here by 8 a.m. on Saturday, don't bother coming in on Sunday." So work culture can be a really weird thing, right? And I think we just have to kind of lighten up and loosen up this and really focus on what are we trying to accomplish.
Where I think it can get really spicy is when, folks try to apply like what they would want for their company and for their job and transpose it onto like what another company. But we're all kind of different in how we're motivated, in what our goals are as a business. And I think like I've seen a lot of great CEOs, many of which are here that I deeply respect, who actually want to pull people together a little bit more. So I think it ultimately comes down to like the nuances of the why behind what organizations want. So without understanding that, like I'm not super quick to judge like, oh, hybrid's great for everyone, or like RTO is great for everyone. At Greenhouse, we very confidently stated to the business last year, as part of our employee value proposition, that we are committed to being remote first. And what that means is we care about what you do and the quality of what you do more so than where you are. That said, we also invest into opportunities for people to gather at like moments in time. So, for example, it's not that we don't believe that people don't have to ever be together. Actually, quite the opposite. We believe that in order for remote work to work really well, you need to have these moments where you have an offsite, you bring people together, you have a moment of collaboration in person, which in my experience, collaborating in person is a totally different experience. Sure. But you don't need that every day. You don't need that, and you don't need to add a condition.
It's distracting.
It's super distracting.
Yeah.
But if it's purposeful, if it's scheduled, and there's intention around how you design that. Like I just had a leadership team offsite for my team, and I brought everyone to Vegas. I'm 8 months pregnant, so I said, I'm not traveling. Y'all come to me. And a lot of the folks were meeting in person for the first time. And we hosted this brainstorming session, and it was so good. Like the speed of ideas, the exchanges, the dynamics, like you don't get that over Zoom. But do I need that every week? No, I don't need that. It'd be really expensive every week.
Yeah.
So,
well, plus again, it would take you away from what you need to get done on a day-to-day basis, right?
Exactly. So I think for like these moments in time, it's like extremely powerful. But in our dedication of being remote first, that doesn't also mean that we don't invest into other in-person experiences. So we have, for example, a partnership with WeWork, so people can kind of have flexible office space. And then we also have this really cool program. We call it the Global Passport Program. And employees can work for up to 60 days in almost like all the countries around the world. Of course, there's a short list where we can't operate, but it allows you to basically work away from home in a different country if you wanted and experience that as part of that program. And people really love that one.
So for us as a company, we've decided that whatever format works best for the individual is the format that we're going to support. So some people like to come to the office, some people are fully remote, some are hybrid. As long as we can work together with our teammates to make sure that we can do our work and put ourselves in the best position to perform at our best, that's what we're going to support today, tomorrow, and the next day. Well, we have clients, of course, in every industry you can imagine, right? Sure. 10,000 clients, there's all kinds of different industries, and some don't have the choice. If you're on a construction job site, you can't be remote. And so what we find is that the principles that we teach are timeless, and they're also placeless in the sense that you can use them on a Zoom if you're fully distributed. You could use them in hybrid settings. It's all about how do we understand the work to be done, the people doing the work, and make sure that we understand how those things align and where they need coaching and interventions and activities to bridge any gaps that we find. And that can be done anywhere. I think that what's happened a lot of times with the return to office is this unfortunate dynamic we see sometimes between the employer and the employee. Who's got the power now? Is it a buyer's market or a seller's market? All these things that are sort of binary, they almost pit us against one another. as opposed to a partnership. I don't want to know about the power. I want to know about the partnership. And when that comes down to it and we say, maybe there are times that we need to be together, let's make sure that we're together. And if there's times when we can do our work remotely and allow people flexibility in their lives and they can fit work into their own styles, then I think we have to be able to question these outdated notions about 9 to 5 in the office, Monday through Friday. That might have been great at one time. It may be right today, but it may not be. And we have to be trusting enough of our employees, and they have to be thoughtful and diligent enough to give us the value that we are looking for in terms of that employment relationship. But when we do that and we work together, then everything gets better for everyone. Yeah.
It's a subject that's really near and dear to me because we were over 3 years ago, we implemented our return to office strategy. So back as soon as vaccines were available, which was roughly the summer, even the late spring of 2021, we invited people back into the office and said, it's optional. We invited in the leaders first, right? And so we decided that we need to have leaders role model like coming into the office and say, hey, if you've got a title of director and above, we expect you to come in. We did it in a modest way. So we just did 2 days a week, right? We didn't over-index and say 3, 4, 5. We just said, hey, a couple of days to have collaboration and the kinds of things that we found were better in person, challenging conversations where you have to innovate or play with ideas. It's just much more facile to do that in person than online, particularly when people are being tugged in so many ways, right? We've all had those meetings where you've got maybe 25 little postage stamps on that call, but fundamentally, there's some research that shows only about 3 or 4 people are actually engaged at any moment in that conversation, and the rest are sort of on the sidelines, right? And so you might feel like, oh yeah, we're all there, we're all on the call, we're all participating, but fundamentally, there's a very small people are doing that. Whereas if we're in a room looking at each other and having a conversation, it would be pretty obvious to me if you're sitting there tapping on your computer and right got your laptop open that you're not participating in the conversation. I like to call those people meeting tourists, right?
Oh, I love that.
So anyway,
And tourists.
when it comes to back in the office, we got people in before kind of their assumptions about the working from home forever got too grounded in theirs. We never told people that there was a indefinite thing. We told people very clearly when the conditions are safe enough, when the cases are going down and vaccines are available, we're going to ask you to come back in. We didn't tell them it's going to be some arbitrary date on the calendar only to move it 5, 6, 7 times like some tech companies did where they started to lose trust with people. Is we said these are the conditions we need and we'll give you enough notice and then we'll invite you to come back in. And then once we did that, we've never had to make it mandatory. It is the most powerful thing that motivates human behavior is what other people are doing, right? And so when you see our company on Tuesdays and the entire Bay Area workforce, which is where we're located principally, coming into the office and you're the one on screen, you realize somewhere along the way, oh, I'm supposed to be in the office. And you just come because that's what people do. And so we just align on those Tuesdays and Wednesdays, have an entirely different experience those 2 days than we do on Monday, Thursday, and Friday. And that alignment together means that those are the days where we need to do the collaborations, the bigger meetings where you're going to lose people, where you have to sit around knee to knee and play with an idea, where you want to teach somebody and really have them engage versus just sort of listening with one ear. And so we plan all those meetings on those Tuesdays and Wednesdays. And then the rest of the week is for a one-on-one, which frankly, it doesn't really matter where you are. I'll do my one-on-ones principally while I'm walking. And so I'll do a walking meeting with that person. And all I can do is hear them in my ears through my earbuds, right? And I'm saying, okay, all I can hear is your voice and I'm walking down the street. And I'm completely present, even though I'm not physically present, because it's just the two of us. If I listen to a meeting with 25 people, I'm just going to be completely disengaged from that conversation, not able to participate. And so we just sculptured our work week in a different way so that we're really activating people differently on those days in the office versus when they're away, where they can do deep work and kind of focus on some of that more deep individual contributor kind of work.
When we came to Transform last year, we led a session and I gave a talk about this great tug of war that was emerging, right? Between employees pulling on one side, demanding flexibility, CEOs pulling on the other side, demanding folks come back to offices. And a lot of companies just a year ago was only just sort of the beginning of that real big return to office push, which has certainly gained steam since Transform 2024.
Corporate America will have their way, right? They're going to put people back in the office. They need to fill those buildings. That's how the world works. So I don't think we can avoid it, but I think it will become a tool for competitive businesses and smaller businesses, right? So you're going to have, we'll use some of these tech companies as an example, AWS, Meta, Google, they hoard tech talent. But if they're going to require you to be there, but some cool new startups like, hey, we don't care where you work from home, that's going to be the competitive advantage, right? So when the big companies adopt it, it's going to provide flexibility for smaller companies to use it in their favor where they can't pay as much, but they're going to be able to offer something that they're not getting as a big company. So return to work is happening. In what force we're going to see, but to some degree, it's going to be the reality. Corporate America has not given us a choice, right? But it's going to be a cool advantage for smaller businesses.
What we have not really seen is any real measurable change to productivity or to outcomes. There's an expectation that there will be. That's not really what the data that we've seen, at least, has shown us. Sort of what was proven during COVID was that we can be just as productive. I think one of the downsides that we did see was around connection, and certainly folks that were spending more time at home by themselves in a more pure remote fashion, they experienced isolation. Younger generations and new workers were experiencing a loss of mentorship and sponsorship that was afforded to them by being in an office environment, having access to more senior folks more easily. So we saw those things decline, and I think that's largely why we've seen the proportion of companies over the last year that are purely remote start to decline. But hybrid has really emerged as the mainstay model. The question is, of course, now, how do we get hybrid right? How is it when we ask folks to come back in 50% of the time or 3 or 4 days a week, how can we make sure that when they do come in, they're getting value out of that experience and they're not coming in just to sit on Zoom meetings all day long, but when they get there, that not only is it the right environment, but again, it fuels the work that they have to do. And that goes back to the work that we're doing on developing technologies to ensure that in this fluid hybrid environment, that we get the right people together in the right places at the right times based on actual collaboration patterns, as opposed to the fixed methodologies that had largely guided that work in years past.
And so if we're trying to provide some level of direction, and maybe they have overcorrected in some things and areas that they shouldn't have maybe fully focused on. And what I mean by that is that when you're looking at your workforce, you can't deny that you can't use technology as an opportunity to create community. Technology exists. You also can't deny that interactions in the office setting is important. So I think what's really important is that a company, when they're building and scaling their organizations, they have to come up with a balance of both. So maybe in the company, like Mondays and Fridays, people work from home and they work on site Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Maybe we work remotely for 2.5 months, but we come together for 1 week every single year in Colorado, and we rent the same location, the same spot, and we do that effectively. So I think companies really have to look at their workforce objectively, but also understand that, like, people, you can't compete with the fact that your kid is in ballet. You can't compete that your kid's like a student athlete or a gymnast, right? Like, you're not going to miss that, right? When you've had that.
Isn't that
And
nice
so-
that we're there?
And-
That we're actually saying things like that? We don't want to miss our kids' ballet?
Yeah, and dads have taken on a responsibility as well, and moms have taken on the opportunity to like have amazing careers. So you can't minimize mom and you can't minimize dad in finding that balance.
Sure.
And so in some ways, if we can figure out the hybrid, the return to the office really more about how do we create hybrid communities and develop best practices, and then also work, because no one's like, I'm walking around, no one's really doing that work deeply, right? Where you're saying like, look, here are the 3 best scenarios of companies and how they best work. And by the way, here's the real estate companies where you can actually come together as a community once a year, or like you can work having shared space even as a company, right? So how do you do that effectively?
Sure.
Well, 1Password, believe it or not, is 2-decade-old company, and it's always been remote. However, what the premise of connections and community and face-to-face is important. And so, albeit that we are remote, We regularly structure events and meetings around meeting remote, or we're meeting together in different locations where we have customers and so forth. So it's kind of, I would call it the best of both, because you do need to have human connection. And it's not like you're coming to the office and checking in to have a coffee and checking out. When you go to these meetings, there's a purpose.
Right.